Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over future pieces of content I would like to see come to Diablo 4. Now with Diablo 4 not even being released, it is jumping the gun a little bit to talk about future content and future systems that will be added in future seasons and expansions. But with Diablo 4 being a live service game and having such a big focus on that post-launch content, I think it could be a pretty interesting and worthwhile discussion to have to see what future content people would want added into the game. And with how game development works, and especially live service games, some of the developers are probably already working on future seasons and even potentially content for future expansions. So this could also potentially give developers some ideas of what the player base would want. Now keep in mind, we don't have any specific information on future content. These are just general ideas I had for new systems or new content that I would like to see come into Diablo 4 at some point. Now the first thing would just be an extension to the general PvP content in Diablo 4, because if you don't know, at the launch of Diablo 4, the only PvP content is going to be specific areas in zones you can go into that enables PvP, and anybody in those zones can fight other players when they see them. And there's going to be currencies tied into this and other objectives and activities in these areas, but I think they could expand on the PvP offerings quite a bit. And I think Diablo 4 is in a really good position to establish itself as one of the few ARPGs that has a decent focus on PvP, because most other ARPGs or Diablo-like games either don't have any PvP or have it as almost just a small side activity you can go do. So I think expanding the Diablo 4 PvP into things like arenas and battlegrounds could add a lot of very replayable content to the game. And I think arenas are kind of simple. You could pretty much just copy what World of Warcraft does, and a lot of other games also structure their arenas in basically the exact same way. You could have 1 versus 1, 3v3, 5v5, and you could have unranked and ranked modes to either allow people to have a bigger focus in the arenas trying to rank up, and then they could add currency rewards and even unique cosmetics once you get to certain high ranks. And even if this isn't super balanced when it first comes out, this would still add a lot of content for people who like that more competitive side of PvP. And I don't actually think it would take a ton of development time, because they could just take pieces out of the already developed map, turn it into an arena, maybe add some poles or other line of sight areas in this arena, and you're pretty much good to go. And obviously if they added in the system further down the road, you would want it to become better balanced and maybe more arenas to be added in that have different objectives or different gameplay mechanics inside of them. But just starting off, you could have it very basic, and I think it would add very replayable content. But then you can also have something like Battlegrounds, which I think would take a lot longer to develop, can also add a ton of very replayable content. And you could even model it off of World of Warcraft Battlegrounds as well, or Battlegrounds from pretty much any other games. Essentially just a custom built or reused piece of an environment that has a specific objective in that match and has two different teams of players that fight over that objective. You can have capture the flag, you can have control points, you could have just straight TDM Battlegrounds, anything they want, they could do. And just like pretty much any other game that has Battlegrounds, I think Battlegrounds end up being a main form of content for quite a lot of people. Even though I'm much more of a PvE player, pretty much any time I go back to play World of Warcraft, I'll still randomly jump into some Battlegrounds just because they're generally pretty fun. And I think expanding on the PvP of Diablo 4 would be a very good thing for the longevity of the game. Now looking past PvP, one of these systems that I'm a fan of in any RPG that adds it is Horde modes, or a PvE focused arena type mode. So essentially groups of enemies constantly attack you in usually a smaller area like an arena, and you fight off wave after wave, and these waves are recorded and you can see how high you can go. And I think systems like this can actually play a bunch of different roles. So in another ARPG called Last Epoch, they have pretty much this exact system but it's pretty much not used for gearing. You don't actually get much gear from doing it, but you get decent XP just because you're killing so many creatures. But one of the main things this is used for by the players is to test how strong your build actually is, because every wave it gets harder and harder. So at some point, no matter how strong your build is, you're gonna fail, just because creatures are just gonna get to the point where they could instantly one-shot you, they have more speed, and they have so much health you can't kill them. But having this as a tester of your build, I think is a type of system that should be in pretty much every ARPG. And not only that, you can also determine tons of different rewards if you want it to be a bit more focused on rewards as well. You could have one-time more cosmetic rewards where once you get to big milestones like level 100, level 200 or something like that, you get these really cool, unique cosmetics. You could even allow for a specific type of currency specifically for this Horde mode. You can go buy gear pieces or other cosmetic items, where if you're somebody that really likes Horde mode style of content, it can actually be very rewarding to do a system like this. And kind of similar to PvP arenas, these would generally be a bit more easy to implement than some of the other systems we're going to go over in this video, because again, just like those arenas, they could just take a piece of an already built environment, have you fight in there, and then just have spawners for randomized creatures that get scaled up with every new wave. Now I know it's not that simple, but I think it would generally be much more easy to implement than a lot of the other more complex systems. Now, something that's a little bit along the same vein as Horde mode would be Boss Rush. Now, I think Boss Rush modes or systems aren't actually done very much in ARPGs. There's always some type of system that allows you to fight multiple bosses at once, but there's usually not a defined system that is specifically built around fighting either back-to-back bosses and seeing how quickly you can defeat them, or seeing how many bosses you can defeat before they defeat you, or even just facing big groups of bosses at the same time. And I think systems like this are just really fun to me for some reason. And I do think there is a lot of players that really just want to go fight big bosses. I think Souls-like games, which is pretty much just its own genre, kind of shows that people just want to go and fight really challenging, massive bosses. And I think boss rushes in RPGs or ARPGs more specifically can kind of fill that role in a bit more of a unique way. And there's so many ways you could do this. You could either have where you fight one boss, then another boss, and every new boss you face, it gets more and more difficult, or they could have where you face groups of bosses at a time and it adds in a new boss for every new level, or you face a boss and it's timed. So if you don't defeat that first boss, the next boss just comes in anyway, and it keeps getting more difficult that way. There's tons of different ways you could go about doing this, but I think any way you go about this, you would add some very fun, unique, and challenging content. And also with a boss rush type system, you're constantly going to be adding content into that system without specifically developing content for it. Because if you release a new expansion and there's 12 bosses in that expansion, there's now 12 more bosses that just get put into the boss rush, adding a ton of new content to that one system without having to do much extra development. And I think this also keeps every boss in the game much more relevant for the entirety of the game's life. Now, the final piece of content or system I would really like to see added in to Diablo 4 is a roguelike or roguelite type of system. And I know Path of Exile's, I think, most recent season, this was the main new piece of content, was a system like this. And I'm just a really big fan of these type of systems and even these type of standalone games. And if you're not familiar with this, it's essentially you start at kind of a baseline where maybe you have like no stats or very minimal stats. And it's kind of like you're starting at level 1, and then you go through facing enemies, killing bosses, doing different objectives and stuff like that. And you'll either just get powers or get currency to buy powers. But the general idea is you're constantly getting these new powers and more stats to constantly get stronger and unlock new effects as the enemies and objectives you're trying to complete also get much stronger. And the reason I think these roguelike type of systems end up being incredibly fun and super replayable is just having the randomness of starting at baseline and then randomly getting these powers that maybe you didn't see this power at all last run, but maybe you get it as the first choice in the next run. And now this run is going to be that god run where you got the best powers for what you're trying to go for, and you actually get to complete or do very well in that run. And then maybe in the next run you don't do as well. Maybe there's an enemy that's super hard you have to go against and you don't have the powers you want. But I think that's really part of the fun, is also trying to scrape together a decent build to effectively get through that run or get as far as you can go. And if you've ever played games like Hades, Slay the Spire, or Risk of Rain, you know just how addicting roguelike games can actually be, with just trying to get that god run and get the best combination of powers that just turn you into a complete god for that run. There's so much replayable content added with a system like that, and specifically with the ARPG genre, there's usually already systems in the game that have randomization and that reuse a lot of the other content and environments in the game, and how a lot of the creatures are built to be stronger with the elites or the champions of those enemies, with having the different affixes tied onto those enemies that can be randomized. I think a roguelike system just ties perfectly into a game like that. And on top of that, with a class-based game, you can just add some ridiculous power-ups or effects in a roguelike game, because even World of Warcraft did this with Torghast, which was their roguelike type system. A lot of their powers affected specific abilities for that class, so you could just turn into some godlike version of that class where this ability has no cooldown, or you become a mage where your blink has no cooldown, and every time you blink you create a mirror image of yourself, just creating some ridiculous scenarios that are incredibly fun and build on top of the class you're already playing, which also means if you like this type of roguelike system, you would want to go try it with all of the other classes of the game, because it's going to be such a different experience depending on what class you're playing. And as you can probably tell, a roguelike type system is definitely the thing I want added most into Diablo 4, just because I'm a really big fan of those type of systems. But that's pretty much all I want to go over for some ideas I had for future content for Diablo 4. And make sure to go into the comments and leave your different ideas. I know there's tons of additional ideas of future content for Diablo 4, and with it being such a live service focused game, there's a good possibility somewhere down the road we could get some of these systems that you guys may be putting in the comments. So subscribe if you want to see more Diablo 4 or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about future content possibilities for Diablo 4, and thanks for watching.